Well, hello YouTube. This is David Browning once again, and today's topic is 10 pager tips for crochet. I don't call them top 10 because there are more. If I put my mind to it, I could come up with more. And I won't say that they will be equally as important to you as they are to me. There might be some curiosity. I've talked about this before. The prefix pager has to do with an online identity I have had for many, many years. I used to work with a typesetting language called Pager. So I created an online identity called Pager Bear. Bear referring to a big hairy gay man. Well, I lost a shit ton of weight, and I no longer work with Pager. But I'm still Pager Bear. I don't use it as often as I once did. I lived in the Pager pad. I drove the Pager Camry. Later, I drove the Pager Wagon when it was a VW. That sort of thing. My ex was the Pager Cub. But anyway, that's where Pager comes from. So without further ado, these 10 tips. I have them numbered just for identification purposes, but I don't want that to suggest an order of importance. So I'm not going to go from 10 to 1. I'm going to go from 1 to 10, I guess. So the first one is really basically, and this is one of the most important ones. Carpenters will say, particularly Norm Abram from This Old House on American TV, will say, measure twice, cut once. I will say twice is not enough. Counting is really, really, really important. Count like your life depends on it. Count like your project depends on it, because it does. The next one, which I will call number 2, I'm already out of order anyway. Know when gauge is important. Know how to measure your gauge. If you're doing something like a scarf or a blanket, it might not be as important. If you're doing an item that is going to be worn by an actual person of an actual size, then gauge is more important. Also, if you are alternating different kinds of stitches, gauge might be important. Because there might be unexpected puckering or some other unexpected effects. So know when it's important, and when it is important, take measures to ensure that you have the right gauge. Related to that is another one, to do a practice swatch. Anytime you're doing a new stitch, a new technique, a new hook size, anything that is, or even if it's a new pattern of alternating stitches, just do practice swatches to see what's going on, to see how it's going to turn out, to see how easy it's going to be. It's very useful, and you can learn a lot from it. Okay, here's number, I've already lost the numbering. I guess we'll call it 3. Okay, know the difference. If you are going back and forth with your stitch, like a scarf you might, or a blanket or something, or if you are going in the same direction with every round, as in something that's done in the round, the loop that you use with a particular post is, they always say it's on top of the post. It's not on top of the post. When you are going in the same direction, such as when you are crocheting in the round, or when you're doing repeated rows in the same direction, like if you're doing a mosaic and you start a multiple rows of single crochet at the same side, then the loop that you're going to use for a particular stitch is going to appear to be before the post. Conversely, if that is the correct word, when you are going back and forth, when you turn the work over and go back in the opposite direction, it only makes sense that the loop affixed to a particular post or a particular stitch is going to appear to be after the stitch. Once I realized this, I stopped doing a lot of miscounting and making a lot of mistakes, particularly when working in the round. Speaking of working in the round, let's see. I'm going way out of order in my notes. If you're doing circles in the round, which is a very, very common way to start hats, my preferred way of doing circles is to think of it as wedges, whether you're starting with like 12 stitches in your initial round or 9 or what. You're always going to have 12 wedges or 9, or however many you start with in your initial circle, that's how many wedges you have. And your increase, this again, my preferred way, my increase is always in the last stitch of the wedge. So, the first round is going to be 12. The second round is going to be 24, which is easy. 2 stitches in every stitch from the first round. The next one is going to be the first stitch of the wedge has 1 stitch in the stitch from the previous round, and then 2 stitches in the next. So that makes your wedge from 2 stitches to 3. And then in the next round, it's going to be 1 stitch in each of the first 2 stitches, and then in the very last stitch you got 2. So you've turned 3 stitches into 4, and you just continue growing that way. This makes the most sense to me in terms of working circles. Some people will stagger things so that it's not so obvious where you're doing your increases. I prefer to do it this way. I prefer not to stagger. And that's just the way it is. And, your mileage may vary. You might know a different way that is easier for you. Speaking of doing rounds doing additional rounds in the round, or also in doing back and forth, doing rows, make a decision about how you're going to do your first stitch of the round or the row. Some patterns, if you're doing double crochets, they'll say your first stitch will be your chain 3, and then that's the stitch itself. So your next stitch will be in the next space. Sometimes that works for me, sometimes that doesn't. Sometimes I prefer a different method. Sometimes I will do 1 chain and then do a double crochet or whatever the stitch is that I'm using in the first stitch. So the one chain, or sometimes two chains, will not count as a stitch. I will just ignore it. And I do that either going back and forth or going in the round. And it's not that hard to hide, especially if you're eventually going to do an edging. But it's usually okay even if you're not doing an edging, just so long as you keep your stitches consistent and your edges are straight. It's in my work, it creates less of a disturbance than doing the chain 3 and trying to make it count as a double crochet for the first stitch. Again, your mileage may vary. Okay, what's next? Oh, this is very important. Always use the same hook within a project. If you put your project down, put it away for a day, for a week, for a month, or longer. When you pick it up, make sure you're using the same hook. Let me tell you. This is an H hook. This is an H hook. I have H hooks that look like this, although it's not an H, but you know what I mean. There are different types of hooks. There can be no guarantee that if you pick it up with a different hook that calls itself the same size, that you will get the same size stitches when you pick it up again. Make sure you know which one you're doing. If you're putting the project away in a project bag, ideally you would have enough hooks that you would be able to put the hook in there as well. Most of us don't have that many hooks. I have enough to start a store, but I still don't have enough to do that. So you would, on a post-it note or any kind on any note card, slip of paper, make a note of which hook you are using, what brand, however you identify your different varieties of hooks. But it's very important when you pick it up to use the same hook as when you put it down. The next one. When you do a starting chain, particularly for something that goes back and forth, like a scarf, a blanket, that sort of thing. Unless you're doing a foundation row of whatever stitch, foundation, single, double, half double crochets, which I don't do very often. I just find it easier to do the chain. But when you do the foundation chain, use a larger hook than you're going to use when in the body of the work itself, because you will avoid a lot of the curling that happens. Sometimes it's a very natural tendency for us to make our chains tighter than we make our work when we do the actual stitching. So using a larger hook, either 1 or 2 sizes larger, helps to avoid that. I have found that tip to be very useful. I got it from somebody. None of these really originate with me. Some of them are my own observations, but I'm sure that that I'm not the only one who's ever noticed these things. I got this from somebody else's, either a pattern demonstration or something like that. Let's see, what else do we have? When you're doing post stitches, front post double or triple crochet, back post double crochet, anything like that, particularly if you're doing crossing, as if you're doing a cable. Don't be stingy with the yarn. This is a difficult thing. I don't always get it right myself. But you really have to make sure you pull up enough yarn when you do your post stitch to keep the piece from curling or bunching. My hat pattern, the link is in the description, is all front post double crochet, and people have asked me, how do I keep it from curling? And that's the only answer. You have to make sure that you're pulling up enough yarn when you make your post stitches. There's no other way to do it. And I still don't get it right all the time. In fact, I've made some hats with that very same pattern. I've already started my Hat Not Hate bag for this year. Eventually it'll migrate to a box. And I've been doing some of that same pattern with the post stitches. And some of them curl. And there's no getting around it unless you go back and redo the whole thing. You have to make sure you're pulling up enough. That's very important. Okay, this one also is very important. Don't be afraid to say, oops, I did that wrong, and rework an entire section or even entire pieces. I have done 2 or 3 different entire pieces with the same yarn because I would complete something and just not like how it turned out. And I would recycle the yarn because I'm poor. So anyway, don't be afraid to restart. You're not in a competition except against yourself, and sometimes that's the hardest one. I once was working on something that had alternating hook sizes. I think it was like the sleeve of a sweater or something, and you would start at the cuff with a smaller size hook and then do the body of the rest of the sleeve, excuse me, in the larger size hook. And at one point I put it down and came back to it the next day and picked up the wrong size hook to keep going. And I didn't realize this until like 10 or 20 rows in. And when I first realized it, I thought, oh, maybe it won't be that noticeable. It was. I had to pull out many, many rows to go back to the correct size. So basically I went back to where I had stopped with the correct size and then restart with the correct size instead of the wrong size. Because if I had done it, if I kept going, I would never have been able to live with myself. So there's no shame in it. It's a learning process. It's always a learning process. So I think I've done 10 tips. Here's a bonus tip. Do projects that you like. If you like to do hats and scarves, do hats and scarves. I like to do sweaters and blankets. So that's what I try to do. I intersperse them with, I call, a hat or a scarf, a palette cleanser between two large projects, or perhaps in the middle of one when I get bored with a big one. But, do what you like. Some people like, hat scarves, shawls. Actually, I'm doing a shawl right now. This is a Bag-O-Day crochet pattern using, once again, Lion Brand Mandala yarn. Anyone who watches me can tell that I'm rather fond of Lion Brand Mandala. I hope Lion Brand can tell that I'm fond of Lion Brand Mandala and other yarns that Lion Brand makes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Anyway, my friend's mother, she only makes washcloths with single crochet and cotton. That's all she wants to do. And that's fine. That's okay. Now, it's a good thing to try new things. See if this is for you. See if it's something you want to keep doing. But if it's not something you want to keep doing, that's okay. I'm not going to judge you. Well, not for that. I might judge you for something else. Who knows? I am that kind of person. Anyway, but do what you like. That's one of my main mottos in life is if it hurts, don't do it. If you don't like Tunisian crochet, don't do Tunisian crochet. If you get everything you want out of your crochet experience doing single crochet washcloths, that's just fine. I don't need you to make me a sweater out of mohair. I can coerce someone else to do that. I can do it myself, except I'd more likely make it out of acrylic because I'm cheap with yarn. But you know what I mean. Anyway, I think that is a fairly decent list of tips. Let me know what your favorite tips are. Let me know if you have any thoughts on any of the tips that I have suggested. And as always, comment, like, subscribe, blah, blah, woof, woof, the rest. You know how it goes with YouTubers. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.